You were standing by the coffee machine, staring blankly at the cup, slowly filling with hot coffee. The warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the small break room, but you couldn't seem to enjoy it today. Your thoughts were consumed by the cold and distant figure of your boss, Jungkook. He was the CEO of the company, successful, smart, and always calm and collected, but never warm, especially towards you. A soft pat on your shoulder made you turn. It was Sana, your close friend and colleague. She gave you a concerned look. Juan, what's going on? Why do you look so bored? She asked, leaning closer with a teasing smile. You sighed, looking down at the cup of coffee in your hand. Nothing, girl. But your voice lacked any excitement, and Sana could easily pick on that. You were never good at hiding your emotions, especially from her. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a knowing smirk. Oh, I know that look. You're thinking about Mr. Jungkook, aren't you? You let out a long sigh, feeling like you had been caught red-handed. There was no point in denying it. Yes. Your voice came out in a low tone, barely audible. It was the truth. No matter how hard you tried to keep Jungkook out of your mind, it was impossible. You had spent months working closely with him, and even though he was always professional and distant, you couldn't help but feel drawn to him. Sana tilted her head, looking genuinely concerned now. What happened this time? Your relationship with him isn't progressing, is it? You shook your head, your shoulders slumping as you leaned against the counter. You know how much I have tried, Sana. I'm doing everything I can to melt his heart, but I'm not getting anywhere. It's like he has a wall around him that I can't break. Sana let out a soft chuckle through her eyes were filled with sympathy. Yeah, right, Mr. Jungkook is like an iceberg, cold as ever. But you know, maybe you just need to shake things up a little. You hummed in response, not really convinced. You had already tried so many things to get his attention, but nothing seemed to work. Jungkook was always polite but never let his guard down. He was a CEO first and a person second. He treated you like any other employee, nothing more. Sana opened her mouth to say something else, but before she could, you both heard footsteps approaching. You turned your head slightly and saw one of the company's clients, Son, entering the break room. Son was notorious for being over-friendly, sometimes crossing the line, and today was no different. He smiled widely at you as he walked over, his eyes scanning you in a way that made you uncomfortable. Ah, Wang, there you are. Son greeted you with a fake cheerful tone. I have been looking for you. You forced a smile, trying to hide your discomfort. Good afternoon, Son. How can I help you? He waved his hand dismissively as if what he was about to say wasn't work related at all. Oh, nothing serious. I just thought we could have a chat, you know? It's always nice to catch up with such a lovely lady. His gaze lingered on you longer than it should have, and you could feel the tension rising in the air. You exchanged a quick glance with Sana, who rolled her eyes behind Sion's back. She knew exactly what kind of man he was and had warned you about him before. You kept your smile plastered on your face, though it was becoming more difficult by the second. I'm actually quite busy at the moment, Son. But if there is something work related, feel free to let me know. He chuckled completely, ignoring your attempt to steer the conversation back to business. Oh, come on, man. Don't be stiff. You know, I'm just here to brighten your day. We don't have to talk about work all the time. His tone was playful, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at you. You wished he would just leave, but he seemed determined to stay and make small talk. The situation was growing more awkward with each passing moment. You were about to politely excuse yourself when suddenly a loud deep voice echoed from behind you. Just as you were catching your breath from Jungkook's sudden appearance, another voice boomed from behind, loud and sharp. Ryan, you froze, recognizing the voice immediately. Your heart skipped a beat as you slowly turned around, gulping with fear. Mr. Jungkook. You stammered, looking up at him. His eyes were narrowed, his expression cold and stern. How much time will you take to prepare a coffee? Jungkook's voice was sharp and his gaze pierced through you. Are you enjoying yourself here instead of focusing on work? You stood there speechless, your hands slightly trembling as you held the coffee cup. His eyes then shifted towards him, and you realized with a jolt that he wasn't just upset with you. There was something more, something like jealousy. His jaw was clenched, and his posture tense as if he had seen more than just a casual conversation between you and Son. Sun, completely unaware of the shift in the atmosphere, chimed in with a cheerful tone. Good afternoon, Mr. Jungkook. Jungkook turned his head slowly, his eyes cold as ever. Good afternoon, he greeted back, though his tone lacked warmth. There was a clear tension in his voice, almost like a hidden threat. Son seemed to sense it too, as his smile wavered a little. Jungkook took a step closer, his tall figure dominating the room, his attention still on Son. I thought you were coming to my cabin, Mr. Son, he said, his voice calm but edged with sarcasm, but I didn't know you were comfortable here. His words, though professional, were laced with an undeniable rudeness. Son, who had initially appeared confident, now seemed a bit uncomfortable. He knew better than to push his luck with Jungkook. After all, Jungkook had the power to ruin careers if he wanted to. No, Mr. Jungkook, Son stammered, wiping the sweat that was forming on his forehead. I just saw your secretary here and I was only asking about you. Jungkook glanced at you briefly before turning his attention back to Son. His gaze was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, obsession perhaps. Where would I go, Mr. Son? I just called you 10 minutes ago. The tension in the room thickened as Jungkook paused, his words lingering in the air like a challenge. Son shifted nervously under the weight of Jungkook's stare. Anyways, Jungkook said, breaking the silence, let's go and discuss in my cabin. He took a step forward the door, but stopped briefly, turning his cold gaze back to you. Wine, bring my coffee, now. You nodded quickly, your voice failing. You, assumable. Yes, Mr. Jungkook. Without waiting for a response, Jungkook strode out of the room, his presence leaving a chill behind. Son, who had been standing there awkwardly, gave you a brief and hurried after Jungkook, wiping his sweaty palms on his suit jacket as he followed the CEO. As they left, you remained rooted to the spot, your heart still racing. There was something about the way Jungkook had acted. He had never been so possessive before it. It wasn't like him to show any sort of emotion, especially not jealousy, but today it had been written all over his face. He had clearly not liked seeing you with Son, even though you were just talking. You finally snapped out of your thoughts and grabbed the cup of coffee you had prepared. With shaky hands, you hurried toward Jungkook's cabin. You couldn't afford to keep him waiting any longer, especially after what had just happened. When you reached his office, the door was slightly ajar and you could hear their voices inside. You paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before knocking lightly. Come in, Jungkook's voice called from the other side. You pushed the door open and entered, keeping your head slightly bowed as you approached Jungkook's desk. He was seated in his large leather chair, looking every bit the powerful CEO that he was. His gaze shifted to you. Here is your coffee, Mr. Jungkook, he said softly, avoiding his eyes. Jungkook didn't say anything at first. He simply reached for the cup, his fingers brushing against yours again. You quickly pulled your hand back, standing there awkwardly, waiting for further. Son, who was seated across from Jungkook, was visibly uncomfortable. He kept glancing nervously at Jungkook, clearly still intimidated. Jungkook sat back in his chair, drinking his coffee as he stood nearby, feeling tense. He looked at you briefly before speaking. His tone was as cold and professional as always. Show Mr. John the designs, he said calmly, as though nothing had happened. You nodded quickly, picking up the folder with the designs and stepping forward. You tried to keep your composure as you placed the folder in front of Son and opened it, your fingers slightly trembling. Here are the designs, Mr. Son, you said, forcing a smile while you pointed out the details of the project. Son nodded, but it was obvious that he wasn't looking at the designs. Instead, his eyes were drifting to your chest. You felt his gaze and instantly felt uncomfortable. Your heartbeat quickened as you tried to softly adjust your dress, pulling it hard to cover more of your skin, but you could still feel his eyes lingered where they shouldn't be. Your breath hissed as you felt the disgusting way Soon was staring at you. Trying to ignore it, you continued to explain the designs, though your voice shook slightly. This section shows the concept we have developed, and here is the while Jungkook's voice suddenly cut through your words, making you flinch. He had been observing everything from his seat, and now his eyes were sharp as he glared at Son. Step back. He added firmly, his tone colder than before. You gulped, stepping away from Son without another word. Jungkook stood up from his chair, his movement slow and deliberate, and walked over to where Son was sitting. His presence was intimidating as he towered over the man, but his voice remained calm and as he said, "Can't you show the designs properly?" He didn't even look at you when he spoke, but the words stung. He was always so cold, so distant, but something felt different this time. Jungkook leaned forward slightly, his hands gripping the edge of the table for support as he took over, showing soon the designs himself. But as he did, something caught your eye. Jungkook, without breaking his professional demeanor, unbuttoned the second button of his shirt, exposing more of his chest. "Am I looking, Mr. John?" Jungkook's voice was calm, but the words were laced with venom. Soon blinked in confusion, clearly taken aback. What are you talking about, Mr. Jungkook?" Jungkook straightened up, standing tall and looking down at Son with a cold, piercing gaze. "Don't act like you don't know what I am talking about, Mr. Chan. Your eyes aren't innocent." Son's expression changed from confusion to panic. He quickly got up from his seat, trying to defend himself. "What nonsense are you talking about, Mr. Jungkook?" His voice rose, his attempt to cover up his guilt clear in his defensive tone. Jungkook didn't waste any more time. In one swift motion, he grabbed Son's collar, pulling him closer. The air in the room grew heavy, and your heart pounded as you watched the scene unfold, frozen in place. "You better watch your eyes," Jungkook growled, his voice low and dangerous, "because if I catch you looking at her like that again, you won't have time to see the world." Son's face turned pale as Jungkook's words sank in. He struggled to break free from Jungkook's grip, his voice trembling with fear. "I didn't mean anything, Mr. Jungkook. I was just—" "I don't care what you were doing," Jungkook interrupted, releasing Son's collar with a shove. "Get out. We are done here. The contract is over." Son stumbled back, wiping his wet forehead as he quickly gathered his things. He didn't dare argue or even look in your direction again. He knew better than to push his luck any further with Jungkook. As he hurried out of the cabin, the tension in the room finally began to ease. You stood there in silence, still processing what had just happened. Your heart was racing, and a wave of fear and confusion washed over you. Jungkook's sudden protectiveness, his anger, it was something you hadn't expected. He was always cold, always distant, but today he had stepped toward you, and it had shaken you. Jungkook turned his gaze towards you, his expression softening just slightly. "You don't need to worry," he said, his voice calmer now but still carrying an air of authority. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, you tell me, understand?" You nodded, your voice caught in your throat. "Yes, Mr. Jungkook," you finally whispered, your heart still pounding in your chest. He gave you a brief nod before returning to his desk, sitting down as if nothing had happened. "Get back to work," he said, his tone back to its usual coolness. You quickly turned to leave, your legs feeling shaky as you walked out of his office. As you closed the door behind you, you let out a long breath you didn't even realize you had been holding. Your mind was spinning and your emotions. Jungkook had defended you, and not just in a professional way. There had been something personal about it, something protective. You couldn't stop thinking about it, wondering what it all meant. Maybe you thought there is more to Jungkook than just the cool CEO he shows to the world. The next day you stood across from Jungkook's desk, flipping through some papers. The cabin was quiet with only the soft sound of pages turning and the occasional clink of Jungkook's pen tapping against his desk. He was reviewing a file, completely focused. His face unreadable as usual. You decided it was time to stir things up a little. "Mr. Jungkook," you began casually, causing him to glance up from the file. "Surgeon told me to thank you on his behalf." Jungkook's eyes narrowed in confusion as he stared at your surgeon. He repeated clearly, not recognizing the name. Yes, he is my boyfriend, you added, watching closely for his reaction. That was it. You saw the flicker of anger in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched tightly, and the way his hand immediately stopped moving. He slammed the file shut and glared at you, his wings popping out on his temples. Why does he want to thank me? Jungkook asked, his voice dangerously calm, though the jealous were clear. His eyes were fixed on you, almost burning a hole through you. For saving me from Soon yesterday, he said with a shrug, pretending it wasn't a big deal. Inside, though you were holding back your laughter at how seriously he was taking the fake story. Alright, Jungkook said stiffly, clearly trying to maintain his composure, but you could see the irritation bubbling under the surface. His eyes flickered back to the file in front of him, but it was obvious he wasn't really focusing on it anymore. His mind was elsewhere, probably filled with thoughts about your so-called boyfriend. You enjoyed watching him struggle to act calm, then your phone buzzed on the table and you quickly glanced at it. Excuse me, Mr. Jungkook, you said, trying to sound as professional as possible. Sojun is calling me, can I attend this? You could see the annoyance flash across his face, his lips pressed together in a thin line, and for a second you thought he might explode, but he controlled himself, though barely. Fine, he muttered clearly, pulling back from saying more. Thank you said quickly and left the cabin, practically skipping out in amusement. As soon as the door closed behind you, you burst out laughing, covering your mouth to muffle the sound. Just then Sana walked by and saw you giggling to yourself. She raised an eyebrow. What's going on, Wine? You grinned at her and whispered, I created a fake boyfriend story. You should have seen Jungkook's face. He was so jealous, it was priceless. Sana gasped and laughed softly. No way. And the prank? You nodded, pulling down the collar of your blouse slightly to show the red mark you had created earlier. I'm about to pull that one now. Wow, this is going to be hilarious, Sana said, trying to hold in her excitement. You gave her a wink before straightening your face and heading back into Jungkook's cabin. You took a deep breath, making sure to look as innocent as possible. When you entered, you kept your head slightly tilted so the mark on your neck was clearly visible to him. Mr. Jungkook, I have a doubt here, he said, walking over to his desk and leaning forward slightly. You made sure to sweep your hair to one side, giving him a clear view of the fake. You could feel his eyes on you, but you pretended not to notice. He was quiet for a second, then his voice cut through the silence. What's that on your neck? Jungkook asked coolly, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You quickly straightened up, pretending to be startled. Oops, you said, quickly covering the mark with your hair as if you had forgotten it was there. I'm sorry, it's from my boyfriend. Jungkook's eyes darkened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of his desk. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at you with a look that made your stomach flip. You could practically see the storm brewing. Jungkook, your boyfriend. Jungkook repeated, his voice dangerously low, almost as if he was trying to control the rising jealousy. You nodded innocently. Yeah, it happened last night. You said softly as if you were embarrassed. Your jaw dropped in shock as Jungkook's words echoed in the room. I think he doesn't know how to give a proper "let me show you," he said with a teasing smirk. Mr. Jungkook, you started, completely caught off guard by his bold statement. Your heart raced as you watched him slowly stand up from his seat. He unbuttoned the middle button of his coat and casually slid it off, leaving him in his fitted blackish grey shirt. Your eyes widened as he rolled up his sleeves, exposing his strong forearms. Do you really think you can make me jealous with your fake boyfriend? He asked, his voice low and smooth, stepping closer to you. You blinked in confusion. Fake boyfriend, you repeated, stumbling over your words as you instinctively stepped back. Yeah, he said, now it's just a few steps away from you. Do you think I'm a fool to believe your little prank? His gaze darkened and you could feel your pulse quickening. He had clearly overheard your conversation with Sana outside the cabin. You swallowed hard, feeling the tension in the air rise. As you backed up, your body hit the wall behind you, leaving you with nowhere else to go. Jungkook placed his hands on either side of your head. blocking you in his presence. Overwhelming. Tell me, he murmured, his eyes locked on yours. Why did you pull the prank? Your voice trembled as you answered. I thought making you jealous would get you to confess your feelings for me. You always act cold, like you're made of stone, like your heart is made of ice. To your surprise, Jungkook chuckled softly, a sound you had never heard from him before. The rare smile that spread across his face made him look even more handsome, and you couldn't help but feel your breath catch in your throat. You look cute when you smile, you whispered without thinking, and you look beautiful no matter what. He whispered back, his deep voice sending shivers down your spine. Your heart skipped a beat at his compliment, and you felt your cheeks flush with warmth. Jungkook's gaze softened as he looked into your eyes. I know I have been cold, but that's only because I didn't know how to handle what you make me feel. You melted me with your warmth and love, even when I acted like I didn't care. You blushed even more, your heart racing in your chest. Then why didn't you confess before? You asked, your voice soft and unsure. I didn't think it was the right time, he admitted, his lips now hovering near your cheek. But now this seems like the perfect chance. His breath was warm against your skin, and the close proximity made your heart spin. His lips gently brushed your cheek, sending a jolt of electricity through you. Do you love me? He whispered, his lips now dangerously close to yours. Instead of answering with words, you leaned in and pressed your lips against his in a soft yet eager kiss. Jungkook smirked against your lips before kissing you back, his hands slowly trailing down to your waist. He held you close, his grip firm and gentle, as if he didn't want to let go. After a moment, Jungkook pulled away, but only slightly, his forehead resting against yours as he breathed out. So, now I'm your boyfriend. You could only nod too caught up in the moment to speak. Jungkook's hand slowly moved to brush your hair aside, exposing your neck again. Let me make it real, he whispered, his lips now hovering near your neck. Your boyfriend will give you a proper mark. Before you could even process what was happening, Jungkook's lips found your. There, he whispered, brushing a finger gently over the. Now no one will doubt it's real. You touched the on your cheek, still trying to catch your breath. I wasn't expecting that, you mumbled, your face burning with embarrassment and excitement. Jungkook chuckled again, leaning down to whisper in your ear. Well, expect more from your real boyfriend from now on. His tone was teasing, but his words held a promise that made your heart flutter. You couldn't help but smile as you looked up at him, realizing that maybe, just maybe, your prank had worked better than you ever imagined. Thank you for watching.